Welcome to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Donnie, joined by my co-host Richie Bradshaw. Richie, it's been a very, very busy week for the Arizona Cardinals and their fans going through the NFL draft, coming up on rookie minicamp. OTAs are right around the corner. And what we're talking about today, the fifth-year option of Isaiah Simmons was declined. We're going to get into that here in just a moment. But before we begin, I saw Harley made an appearance earlier today. How are you and the doggo?
I'm doing good. Doggo's doing good. I'm having to pet her right now because she needs lovin's all the time, and she does not understand that I have a job to do. So I'm gonna have to do all my illustrating with one hand because I got to give her pets. That's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, thankfully you can see Harley just a little bit on the bottom right of your screen. If she was like a little bit more sensual, we might have a problem with what your arm is doing, but we're gonna leave that off the table for another day. So the deadline to pick up fifth-year options from the 2020 draft class was today, May 2nd, and Isaiah Simmons was one of the plenty of players who do not have their option picked up. We're talking names like Chase Young, CJ Henderson, Javon Kinlaw, Kenneth Murray, Patrick Queen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, guys like that. If you look at the total 2020 draft class, at least in the first round, not a lot of names outside of the quarterback position jump off to you. And I think that's why we saw so many declined options this time around.
Yeah, man, it was crazy to think. So when you get the news alert from Ari Meirov or Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter, whoever you have on, right? You get that update, 14 players have their options declined. And you're like, that's insane. But you look at the list and you're like, actually, I kind of get it. Like, the only real shockers, Chase Young, which he hasn't been healthy in 2 years. So you can understand that. Chase Young is definitely a little weird. Other than that, I was shocked by Jordan Brooks, who's had almost 400 tackles in the last 2 years for the Seahawks. But outside of the tackle numbers, he hasn't produced like massive box score numbers and interceptions and sacks and fumbles and stuff like that. He's just a good tackler, but it was crazy to see almost half the first round out on their first round picks. But again, once you actually look at the list, you're like, you know what? I get it. And it stinks. It is going to go down as one of the more interesting drafts ever. I don't remember if it's just a little more or just a little less on how many players have earned a Pro Bowl in the entire draft class compared to guys in the first round. I think it was like 16 compared to 14 players, but it might have been like 12 or 13 compared to the 14 who didn't get the first round or fifth-year options picked up. That's insane, Donnie. That is an insane bust rate.
Yeah, and bust rate is something that Cardinals fans really don't want to hear, especially, and we're going to get into this here in a little bit, but, you see a guy like Hassan Reddick drafted out of Temple, a very good edge rusher. They move him around a little bit on the defense. They weren't able to really find a home for him whenever they finally did. It was a contractor, and he boot scoot boogied out. And now I feel like a lot of people are having kind of the same experience / go around with a guy like Isaiah Simmons, who we already touched on a little bit, did have his fifth-year option declined today. First, I just want to go over what that means. He's going to become a free agent next year in the 2024 offseason. He was scheduled to make $12.7 million. And funny enough, you bring up the Pro Bowl, because if he would have made one Pro Bowl, that number would have jumped to about $17 million. So a $5 million difference just for not making a Pro Bowl. And it's crazy to say Isaiah Simmons has not made a Pro Bowl when you consider his talent, right? His potential, what he can do for a defense. But I think, and we can dive into this right now, that's probably a little bit of why Isaiah Simmons had his fifth-year option declined. It's because there's been so much talent and so much potential, but that's really all that's been there for a guy like Isaiah Simmons.
Donnie, when he was coming out of Clemson, he came out and he was definitely not the guy that you were like, this is a super safe player. You knew what the risk was because he didn't have a true lockdown position. He definitely was lots of flashes in the pan, a terrific athlete and everything. But the thing that when he was coming out is you looked at him and you were like, this guy, I almost guarantee is going to be a playmaker at the next level. And to his defense in 2022, he showed that off a little bit. He had 4 sacks. He had 2 interceptions. One of them he took to the house. Like, he showed some of that playmaking capability. The problem is it took a while to get there. Apologies, my dog is like rolling around in the background right now. Just on cloud 9. But he just hasn't put it together consistently. The scary thing here for Cardinal fans is that, is this going to be history repeating itself? Is this going to be, we declined his 4th year or 5th year option, and then he goes out and maybe isn't a Pro Bowler, but has just terrific season in his last year and prices himself out of Arizona, moves on and goes on to be a Pro Bowler with another team like Hassan Reddick did. Like, it's a scary thought, bless you, that people are going to be keeping an eye out on to see if that, like I said, ends up being history repeating itself. It's not what you want to see. But what is important here is that this is new leadership, a new GM and a new coach that did not draft Simmons, and they don't owe him that loyalty. They're going to want to get their guys in there. Simmons was not one of their guys. So it makes all the sense in the world that you don't pick up his option, because if he doesn't fit this scheme, then it's obviously time to move on. And again, that $12 million is a lot of money for a team that's looking to keep as many assets as they can, both in terms of draft picks, but also in terms of cap space to be able to make their moves. And $12 million saved on your cap is enough to bring in a quality football player. So it makes way more sense that they decline the option. It's just one of those where you're really hoping that this is not another Hassan Reddick situation.
Yeah, and like, I do want to be clear too, just because they declined a 5th year option does not mean that they can't negotiate a long-term deal with him. It does not mean that
we've seen it before.
No, absolutely. Dude, even today, it wasn't long-term, but we saw Jordan Love sign a 1-year extension with the Packers instead of them picking up his 5th year option.
Details on that yet?
I think it was like 20 to 22 million. It was just a 1-year contract extension, which I thought was interesting, because wasn't that like right around the money that Love was going to make on the on the tag?
It would have been really close. It was a 1-year, $22.5 million deal. And I don't know what the 5th year option is for quarterbacks, but that's got to be pretty close. So interesting.
But we do have to remember,
probably.
Right, and that's the thing too, that these 5th year options, the salary is guaranteed in the 5th year, and that $12.7 million in 2024. I did take a look at some numbers. At least just basing that off of the average salary for players this year, since obviously we don't know what the market is going to be next year. That $12.7 million figure this year would have been 14th for outside linebackers, 7th for inside linebackers, and then 26th for all secondary players. So boundary corners, slot corners, safeties, it would have been number 26, right above Jalen Thompson, Cardinal safety, at $12 million. If you phrase it like that, and you frame it as, in terms of value, Isaiah Simmons, what he's making compared to all these other guys, it just doesn't make sense to keep him at that price point.
Right. No, 100%. It's just, it comes down to math, and it, like I said, you need that cap space moving forward to continue making this team in your image, and keeping a guy around on a 5th year option. Like, let's say Simmons doesn't play well in the scheme, and Simmons, in a worst case scenario, just doesn't develop enough and feels like he's peaked. Like, you've got that fully guaranteed 5th year option that you're stuck with at that point. And it's like, well, what do we do with Isaiah Simmons, because he can't work in our scheme? Maybe you can trade him, but what's the value going to be that you're going to get back for him? It just makes more sense to decline the option. In a best case scenario, maybe he balls out, you can bring him back. In a good case scenario, maybe he has a really good year, you let him walk, and you can pick up a 4th round compensatory pick. Looks like my light just died, so my apologies to everybody who gets to see me in the dark now.
In the dark like a cave. I do want to point out that his spot check market value was estimated at about $15.8 million per year, which is even more than the $12.7 million salary for 2024. I can't see him getting that number unless he just has a phenomenal year next year. And I want to break it. I'm sorry?
He'd have to be a Pro Bowler.
Oh, dude, minimum, right? In order to pay him that money. I do want to point out the $15.8 million like market value. That was right around what Zach Allen got in free agency. And the Cardinals decided not to bring him back at that price point too. And you can make the argument that Zach Allen has been more impactful for the Cardinals, at least in 2022, than Isaiah Simmons was.
I think that Zach Allen was probably the third best defender on the team last year after Watt and Buda.
And you can make that point too. And then just in terms of salary and where Simmons would rank for the Cardinals, he would be number 4 with that $15.8 million mark behind Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, and DJ Humphries. He would be your 4th highest player just in terms of average salary with that 15.8.
For what it's worth, you love to see that. Like for the Cardinals building moving forward, to know that $15 million would be the 4th highest on the team. You love to see that. That means they're going to have a lot of cap space moving forward.
And I think this could be a win-win for both sides too, because if we want to look at it from like an organizational standpoint, a lot of teams are going to want to cut the cord a year early, then keep a guy on a year too late, right? Like get out while you can so you don't overpay somebody and kind of quote unquote be stuck with them. On the other side of the coin, this is now a contract year for Simmons, and we've seen the talent he can do. We've seen the flashes in the pan. If he's able to have a really good year, he's going to make himself a lot of money. And he's still very, very young too. I think the players hitting free agency right around his age are just like Chase Young, CJ Henderson, and the dude from Jacksonville. I never got his name down.
Josh Allen?
Chason?
Oh, Caleb.
Yeah. I never got his name down. Regardless, though, plenty of opportunity for Simmons to make himself money, but at that price point, it just makes so much sense for the Cardinals to rather wait it out, because they can still pay him in the next offseason. That is not off the table at all. But I think they want to see it before they end up giving him the extension or the money that he wants long term.
So, Donnie, I love that you bring up this could be a good thing for Isaiah Simmons, because I could not agree more with you. This is going to allow him, in a best case scenario, again, where he balls out and maybe has a Pro Bowl level year. Now he's not cap strapped to the $12 million 5th-year option. And we've seen the linebacker rate go up quite a bit. Roquan Smith just signed a $20 million per year average deal with the Baltimore Ravens. And I'm not saying he gets 20 a year, but I mean, man, if he were to have a Pro Bowl season, he could negotiate for pretty close to probably, I don't know, like 16, 17 a year, like just depending on how well he does. But that's more money that he can get in his pocket as long as he plays well. And I got great news for him. He's playing in a scheme with Jonathan Gannon that just had Hassan Reddick from a linebacker position generate, what he end up with, 17 sacks or something like that. Like,
yeah, he led the league, didn't he?
He was up there. If he didn't lead the league, he was up there. I think Nick Bosa might have, but don't quote me on that. Point is, if he wanted to use Isaiah Simmons in a similar way to Hassan Reddick and just generate those sacks, man, he could hit the open market and make quite a bit of money, even outside of Arizona. So I definitely think that that's got to be one of like the absolute best case scenarios for Simmons camp. Sure, it sucks you don't get your 5th year picked up, but if you ball out, it's not going to matter. You're going to make more money annually.
Yeah, and the problem, and I guess this is the biggest problem too, is that with a guy like Simmons who came to the draft as a unicorn, right? Like he could do so many things on the defensive side of the ball. He's a 6'4" dude who ran like what, a 4.3, 4.4 40. Just this absolute monster of an athlete. He can do so many things, but those guys who come into the league need to find their footing early in one spot in order to kind of capitalize off that success. And that's just something we haven't really seen. I mean, you look at his snap counts from his rookie year to his second year, mostly in the box. His second year, he had a lot of snaps around the line of scrimmage. And then obviously he played that slot corner role a little bit more. 2022, he was primarily that like nickelback slot role. I don't know if that was due to the barrage of injuries the Cardinals had in the secondary. I don't know if they were just continuing to experiment with him because they still had Zaven Collins on the interior as well. But he's bounced around a lot, but it really hasn't seemed like he like found a home, and he's going into his contract year under a new defensive coordinator, a new head coaching regime. They are refusing to say what they're going to do with him. And so the big question becomes, where do you put him?
Right.
Is he a linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Is he a nickelback? Because when you watch him, he's not great at tackling between the boxes, right? But he also consistently, I don't want to say gets burns, but sometimes he struggles to hold his own in coverage, right? So not ideally in the secondary. And then as an edge rusher, we really haven't seen him in that capacity.
It feels like Isaiah Simmons is just a classic. There's so much potential here. And there's just only so far a player with there's so much potential here is going to get you.
Yep.
And we're constantly going to be sitting here waiting for Simmons to become a superstar. We want him to be Shaquille Leonard. We want him to be Fred Warner. We want him to be Roquan Smith. And he's just not that guy. And more than likely, he never will be. And it's not that I'm doubting that he could get there. It's just reality is he's been in the league 3 years, and we more than likely have seen exactly what he is. And it's a very interesting argument for what you should do with him. Like you said, is he an off-ball linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Is he a nickel defender? I want to throw this at you. Now that he is in his final contract year and you've got a brand new defensive coordinator, how willing are you to play him at safety where he has got some experience? Now, obviously, Budda Baker hasn't been traded, and there is a possibility he's not traded because DeAndre Hopkins was supposed to be traded, and now he's back. So if Budda comes back, I feel like the possibility becomes minuscule. But if Budda is gone, I mean, I personally feel like this should be an option that the Cardinals explore just to get as much out of him as you can, in the sense of like, well, we've tried everything at this point, and he just clearly is not a fit for this team.
Yeah, so with the whole safety thing, it's interesting because he's a really rangy guy, and you like the athleticism, you like the length on Isaiah Simmons. But if you just look at him in terms of pass coverage, I mean, 10 games, last year, he was targeted 4 times or more. On 62 targets, he allowed 52 receptions. Half of those games, he allowed a reception to every single target he had.
That feels like a lot.
It is a lot. And, the Cardinals saw him exposed week 1 to Travis Kelce and the Kansas City Chiefs. They benched him the following week, and then slowly but surely he earned his way back into starting snaps. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable moving him at safety. I think he's either a nickelback or I think he's an off-ball linebacker. But kind of touching back onto that point with the whole off-ball linebacker thing, the most amount of run defensive snaps per Pro Football Focus that he's seen in the season came in 2021, 387. That was his worst graded season against the run. Second the worst came the following year, last year, 300 run snaps, the second worst graded of his career. So you start looking at the analytics, you start looking at the data. The more snaps he's involved in trying to stop the running back or the rushing attack, the worse he does.
Right.
And if you want to put 2 and 2 together, he's just not cut out to be in the box as a middle linebacker.
Well, and how depressing is it that Simmons might be a 2-down linebacker after being the 8th overall pick? Like, it's such a bummer that he not only didn't develop, but almost maybe regressed from what we saw in his senior year at Clemson. Like, there's a reason he was the 8th overall pick. This dude was supposed to be a game-changing linebacker. He was supposed to be a guy who would come in and be one of the 5 best linebackers in football, whether it was in the middle, off ball, or whatever have you. Like, he just didn't get to that point, and that's so disappointing for the Cardinals. But for what it's worth, Donnie, I mean, again, take it as a grain of salt. He hasn't missed a game in his
and that's
career.
The thing too. He's got a lot of things going for him. He's still very, very young. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but he's flashed so much potential and so much talent. And like you said, the durability. The first thing you need to do is be available to be on the field, and that's something he has not had a problem with. And he's played a lot of snaps over the last 2 years too. So very much kudos to him on that.
Donnie, what's your best ability?
Availability.
and Simmons has it. That is one thing that not a lot of guys can be counted on for. And Simmons is one of those dudes that you feel good about it.
You do feel good about it indeed. And I do want to point out that Simmons has the highest pass rushing grade currently on the roster, and he's the team's returning sack leader with 4.
That is certainly a stat.
That's a number. That is
absolutely a number. But can you do me a favor and prove that it's a number?
Why?
It was a geometry joke. It clearly didn't land.
I was not great at math, so I probably wasn't even paying attention in geometry. But I mean, there was a lot to go into decision. I'm sure that's why it took the Cardinals all the way down to the wire to make that call, because it is such a big decision. Because on one hand, you have an idea of what he can be. You have an idea of how great Isaiah Simmons can be defensively and all the different things that you can do. And like we talked to Jonathan Gannon today, and he said he talked to Isaiah. He's in a good spot, and they're really excited about the potential that he has within their defense. But other side of the coin, you're paid for what you've previously done on top of what you could potentially do. And the potential has always been there with Isaiah, but unfortunately, it's just always been potential to this point. And the Cardinals aren't willing to pony up the money in order to find out if he's going to be that guy. They want to see it first before they actually do that.
Yeah, and I think that's the bottom line, Donnie, is like the Cardinals, again, I just echo what I said earlier, is there's no guaranteed loyalty here between Gannon and Awesomeforth and Isaiah Simmons. It's just the nature of the beast. Donnie, we say this all the time. The NFL is a business, and it is constantly, what have you done for me lately? And Simmons, while he's improved, is just not the guy you look back on and you're like, you know what? He was worth the number 8 pick. Considering the draft class, he might have still been a first-round pick, but absolutely not the number 8 pick. You certainly think that Cardinal fans wish CeeDee Lamb was a Cardinal right now.
Yeah, but the benefit of hindsight always works for everybody too. So I mean, it was a really good pick at the time. It can still be a really good pick if Gannon's able, and defensive coordinator Nick Rallis are able to figure out a good role for him.
If there's guys that can do it, it's them. For what it's worth, Cardinal fans.
100%. And time will tell what they eventually end up doing. I mean, they've talked about Zaven. It seems like they're going to play a 4-3. Even though,
I think they should.
Right. Even though we talked yesterday about how there's not really like a base defense for leagues. But, I mean, if there were going to be a skeleton D for them to move around, it sounds like they're going to roll with a 4-3. I don't know. We haven't seen anything just yet. I think Kaiser White's going to play that middle, and then they're going to have Zaven and Isaiah on the outside. Zaven is that strong side. Isaiah is that like weak side guy who can also kind of drop Zaven was coverage as well. Dude, I thought he was too, especially since he called the defense last year too. So he has that experience with the green dot. But I didn't watch the Eagles last year. Do you know off the top of your head if Kaiser White called the defense for them or no?
I'm not 100% sure. I know that Reddick was more their pass rushing Sam, and TJ Edwards was the will. So Kaiser was probably the middle, I would assume, at that point. But between him and TJ Edwards, they had 2 million tackles, somewhere in that range. So I don't see any reason why Zaven and Kaiser can't do exactly what they did last year with Kaiser and TJ Edwards.
All right, man. Let's get out of here. Any closing thoughts?
Everything is delicious, as Benjamin Solak once said. Once or twice.
Okay. I think that wraps up this episode. Thanks so much for tuning in to another edition of the All Cardinals podcast. For Richie Bradshaw, I am Donnie Drew, and go check out our work at allcardinals.com or site.com/NFL/Cardinals. Isaiah Simmons may or may not be here next year. We'll stick around until then. Catch you guys.